What if the most dangerous weapon in a criminal's arsenal wasn't a gun or a knife, but a story? Not just a single lie to cover a single crime, but an entire lifetime of them. A universe of falsehoods so intricate and deeply woven that they become a reality. This is a story about a man whose very existence was his greatest deception, and how investigators had to unravel a lifetime of lies to solve a single, horrifying crime: the disappearance of his wife. On the crisp autumn morning of October 12, 2019, in the affluent, manicured suburb of Silver Creek, a man named Arthur Finch placed a frantic 911 call. His voice was a practiced symphony of panic and grief. His wife, Clara Finch, a beloved local philanthropist and heiress to a considerable fortune, was gone. She had vanished overnight from their sprawling, secure estate, leaving behind her car, her purse, and her phone. The only thing missing was Clara herself. When Detective Miles Harding arrived at the scene, he was met by a man seemingly shattered by despair. Arthur Finch was handsome, charismatic, and articulate. He walked Harding through the previous night, painting a picture of domestic bliss. A quiet dinner, a classic movie, a tender goodnight kiss. He claimed he woke up at dawn to find her side of the bed cold and empty. His performance was flawless, his sorrow palpable. To the initial responding officers, he was simply a grieving husband. But Harding, a detective with 20 years of seeing the worst of human nature, felt a flicker of something else beneath the grief. It was too polished, too perfect. The investigation began, and the immediate challenge was the complete lack of physical evidence. The Finch home was pristine. There were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, no blood, no fibers. It was as if Clara had simply evaporated. The mystery wasn't what happened, but how anything could have happened at all. The first interviews with friends and family painted a confusing picture. To some, Arthur was a decorated war hero who had saved his platoon in Afghanistan. To others, he was a brilliant investment banker who had retired young after a series of legendary trades on Wall Street. To another circle, he was a gifted artist who had sacrificed his passion for a quiet life with the woman he adored. The stories were all impressive, all heroic, and all slightly different. Harding began to feel he was investigating not one man, but a committee of them. He pulled Arthur's official records, and the entire, magnificent edifice of his life began to crumble. The military had no record of an Arthur Finch with a Medal of Honor. In fact, they had a record of a man with that name being dishonorably discharged after only 6 months for patterns of untruthfulness. He had never worked on Wall Street. He had been a junior accountant fired for petty embezzlement. The lies were astonishing in their breadth and depth. He had told Clara and her family that he was an orphan, his parents tragically killed in a car accident when he was a boy. Harding found his parents alive and well, living a modest life 2 states away. They hadn't spoken to their son in 15 years, ever since he had faked a cancer diagnosis to solicit money from their church. They described their son as a black hole, a person who consumed truth and reality and left a void. The investigation shifted from a search for a missing person to an archaeological dig of a human mind. Harding and his team weren't just looking for clues. They were trying to find the real Arthur Finch buried beneath decades of fabricated identities. Each lie was a dead end, a false trail designed to lead away from the empty core of the man himself. He had built a fortress of fiction, and somewhere inside it was the truth about his wife's disappearance. Arthur, when confronted with these discrepancies, was a master of deflection. He would weep, expressing hurt that the police were persecuting a grieving man. He would spin new, more elaborate lies to cover the old ones. The supposed war stories. He was part of a classified special operations unit, and his records were sealed. The embezzlement. He was a whistleblower framed by a corrupt superior. For every inconsistency, he he had a ready-made, dramatic explanation. The psychology at play was baffling to the seasoned detectives. Arthur wasn't a typical liar. He didn't just lie to get out of trouble. He lied as a default state of being. The lies weren't just self-serving, they were self-creating. He had invented a version of himself he found more palatable than the truth, and he had inhabited that character so completely that the line between fact and fiction had seemingly dissolved in his own mind. He was a pathological liar. This presented a unique challenge for the investigation. Anything Arthur told them was useless. Any alibi he provided, any timeline he constructed, was built on a foundation of sand. They were dealing with a suspect whose every word was a potential piece of misinformation. They had to discard his testimony entirely and build a case from the outside in, relying only on what they could independently and empirically verify. Weeks turned into a month, and the case grew cold. The media frenzy was intense, with Arthur giving tearful, compelling interviews, pleading for his wife's safe return. He was convincing. The public saw a heartbroken hero, and pressure mounted on the police department, who were increasingly portrayed as callous and incompetent for suspecting him. Arthur was winning the public relations war, using the same skills of manipulation he had used his entire life. Harding grew obsessed, spending his nights poring over Arthur's interview tapes, watching the subtle shifts in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hand as he delivered his most heartfelt lines. He wasn't just lying, he was performing. He seemed to draw energy from the deception, a palpable thrill from successfully duping his audience, whether that audience was his wife, his friends, or a team of police detectives. The lie was not a tool, it was the objective itself. The breakthrough, when it came, was not from a confidential informant or a dramatic confession. It came from a single mundane detail buried in Arthur's first, perfect story. He had told Harding that on the night Clara disappeared, they had stayed in and watched Casablanca, her favorite movie. He had described the evening with romantic flourish, recounting how they had held hands during the final, iconic scene at the airport. It was a small, sentimental detail, almost certainly another lie designed to paint a picture of a loving marriage. But it was specific. On a hunch, Harding's team subpoenaed the records for the Finch family's smart TV and streaming accounts. As they suspected, Casablanca had not been watched. But something else had. At 10:30 p.m., the exact time Arthur claimed to be watching a classic romance, the account was used to stream a 2-hour documentary. The title of the documentary was Wilderness Forensics: The Science of Concealment. It was a graphic, detailed exploration of how bodies decompose in different environments and the best methods for hiding human remains in remote, rugged terrain. This was the lie that mattered. This wasn't a lie about his past to make him seem important. This was a lie about his actions on the night his wife vanished. This was the lie that connected him to the crime. This single piece of digital evidence was enough to secure a search warrant for all of Arthur's devices and vehicles, which he had previously refused to provide voluntarily. The forensic tech team found what they were looking for in the car's undeleted GPS history. At 1:15 a.m. on the night Clara disappeared, the car had traveled to a location 2 hours north of the city, a desolate, heavily wooded state park. A massive search operation was launched in the park. After 2 grueling days, a team of cadaver dogs led investigators to a freshly disturbed patch of earth, hastily covered with leaves and branches. Just beneath the surface, they found Clara Finch. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. The grieving husband, the war hero, the financial wizard, was a killer. Arthur's arrest was the lead story on every national news channel. The public that had sympathized with him felt a collective sense of shock and betrayal. In custody, his stories became even more grandiose. He claimed Clara was part of a secret espionage ring, and he had been framed by rogue government agents. He alleged the GPS data was faked, the documentary viewing a sophisticated hack. His ability to generate new realities was boundless. The trial was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Arthur insisted on taking the stand. For 3 days, he held the courtroom spellbound, weaving his most elaborate tale yet. He was calm, charming, and utterly convincing. He cried on cue, displayed righteous anger, and never once broke character. He almost seemed to believe his own fantastic story, a testament to the depth of his pathology. The prosecutor, a shrewd woman named Elizabeth Cho, made a brilliant strategic decision. She didn't try to poke holes in his wild espionage story. Trying to disprove a lie with a compulsive liar is a fool's errand. They will simply invent a new lie to plug the hole. Instead, she used her cross-examination to force him to recount every lie he had ever told about his own life. Methodically, she walked him and the jury through his entire fabricated history. The war medals, the Wall Street fortune, his deceased parents. With each lie he was forced to admit to, his credibility crumbled. She wasn't proving that his final grandiose story was a lie. She was proving that the man himself was a lie. The person on the stand had no relationship with the truth, so nothing he said could be believed. The jury saw him not as a devious killer, but as a hollow man, a collection of borrowed stories and empty boasts. His motive, as the prosecution laid out, was tragically simple. Clara, who had long suspected his stories were exaggerated, had finally hired a private investigator and had discovered the full, pathetic truth. She had confronted him, demanding a divorce. Faced with the loss of her wealth and the collapse of his fictional world, he had killed her. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Arthur Finch was found guilty of first-degree murder. As the verdict was read, he showed no emotion. He simply began whispering to his lawyer, likely already crafting a new story for his new reality. The wrongfully convicted man, the martyr, the hero of his own prison-bound tragedy. For him, the performance would never end. The aftermath of the trial left the community and legal experts grappling with the psychology behind such a profound and pervasive liar. Experts who studied the case identified Arthur not just as a compulsive liar who lies out of habit, but a pathological liar. His lies were more complex, more dramatic, and were a central part of his personality, often for no clear reason other than the act of deception itself. For pathological liars like Arthur, the lie is not a means to an end. It is the end. The validation and attention they receive from their fabricated stories can become addictive. They construct an alternate reality where they are the person they wish they were, braver, richer, more important. This reality is a defense mechanism against a deep-seated sense of inadequacy and shame. This case became a textbook example of how this personality trait can intersect with violent crime. Arthur's entire life was dedicated to maintaining his false self. When Clara threatened to expose that self, she wasn't just threatening a divorce. She was threatening to demolish the very foundation of his existence. The violence was not an act of passion, but an act of psychological self-preservation. The legacy of the Clara Finch case is a chilling one. It serves as a stark warning about the dangers of charisma when it is untethered from integrity. Arthur Finch charmed everyone, his wife, his friends, the media. He used the human desire to believe in good, heroic stories as a weapon, manipulating the very fabric of social trust for his own dark purposes. For law enforcement, the case has been incorporated into training manuals on interview and interrogation techniques. It highlights the importance of external verification and the danger of being swayed by a compelling narrative, especially when the narrator is a suspect. It underscores the old investigative axiom, trust but verify, and adds a new one. When you find a lie, look for 1,000 more. It also leaves us with a profoundly unsettling question about the nature of identity. Arthur's lies were so pervasive that one has to wonder if he even knew who he truly was. Was there a real Arthur left beneath the layers of fiction, or had the performance consumed the performer entirely? He was a ghost in his own life, a collection of stolen valor and borrowed dreams. Ultimately, the story of Arthur Finch is not just a true crime story. It is a cautionary tale about the black holes that can exist behind a charming smile and a good story. It reveals that the most terrifying voids are not in deep space, but in the human soul, and that some people will do anything, even kill, to prevent you from seeing the emptiness inside them. The case forces us to look at our own lives and the stories we are told. We all depend on a shared understanding of the truth to function as a society. People like Arthur Finch are a virus in that system, creating chaos and distrust wherever they go. They remind us that the truth is not a given. It is a fragile thing that must be constantly guarded and defended. And so we end where we began, with the power of a story. Arthur Finch's life demonstrates that a lie, told with enough conviction, can be just as powerful as the truth. But it also shows that reality, no matter how deeply it is buried, has a way of clawing its way back to the surface, often with devastating consequences. The truth, in the end, always leaves a trail.